Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for agreeing to be on this panel, and thank you for hosting, and thank you all for coming. We're going to jump right in with a general question that really I would like to direct at you first. Andrew?
Sure.
What is the biggest challenge facing you and your business? What would you consider to be your biggest overall challenge?
Yeah, that's not a simple question, but it is a good starter. So biggest challenge for us is a mixture of the business climate, meaning impact of supply chain, the continued impact of supply chain. I think we're going to talk a little bit about it later, so I don't want to go too deep into that. But the lingering impact of that, as well as the pressures from a hiring and retaining standpoint. Those are the biggest challenges. Love to go into details at some point, but I think to kind of keep us moving, that's where I'd start.
Sure. Okay, we'll touch on that. Jason, from your perspective in the legislature, what do you see? What are you hearing from your constituency regarding the obstacles and challenges that small businesses are facing?
It's it's primarily workforce oriented right now. There's been a big push lately, especially with the tech schools, to push funding towards them. Small business wise, I mean, it's been all over the board. From infrastructure to dealing with inflation that's out there. There's a bunch of different concerns that are just all over the board. And Andrew talked about some of them, but legislatively, I mean, as much as it pains me to say this, we really haven't done much to address it. I mean, the federal government with their infrastructure bill a couple years ago, I think I saw a statistic yesterday that said that less than 20% of the total funding from that has actually gone out. And they're still trying to find ways to push that money out the door. So there's a lot of funding that needs to be made up, and there's definitely a strategy that needs to be put in place, especially for our youth and for the workforce.
Yeah, and what we had been hearing, a lot of my colleagues in the engineering side of things, is that they're not getting asked. The federal government is not getting companies coming and asking for that money. It's not just going to fall out of the sky, right? It's you have to make the ask. You have to have a plan and make the ask.
Well, I think part of that too falls back on legislators. Like I'm constantly asking, like, what can I do? What do you need? How can we help you? Not everyone is engaged like that, and I think that is part of the problem. I mean, when we're looking to bring jobs to our area, particularly here in southwestern PA, I'm constantly out there. Like, hey, what is it going to take for you to come here? Bring your 100, your 1,000, your 5,000 jobs here. Whatever it takes. Let's sit down and let's talk about it.
That opens up something really for me. I'd always heard from elected officials that it's not your job as a legislator or elected official to create jobs. That's his job to create jobs. Your role is to create the platform to help him do that. Is that what do you think of that? What's your take on it?
I think that's perfect. I mean, you're the one with the money. My job is to help you find a place, preferably in my district, so not only people can move there, but people can work there, raise a family, and bring economic development there. So I want to give you the best environment possible so that you want to come here instead of going somewhere else.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that, though, with we are trying to run a business, and sometimes the legalese of the act kind of gets lost on us. We had a speaker come in and talk about how can distribution tap into the Infrastructure Act. And just listening to the nuance of that, it was really, really challenging. We're trying to do a mixture of buying right and selling and building relationships and hiring, and then to try to understand how do we then put together a document to be able to get those dollars released. That's a concern and a hesitation for us. So to hear you saying, like, hey, ask me, that's huge. And I would say that we need more people like that, saying, hey, ask me how I can help, and that would be a way.
Jezree, how about you? You want to weigh in on this? What's from in your role, you're across the state, what are you seeing as major obstacles that small, especially manufacturing businesses are facing?
Absolutely. Thanks. Good question. And it's a timely one today. And before I answer that, if you don't mind, I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you for giving us your time today. Everyone's so busy, and you're willing to drive here, and Hartman for hosting, and Jamie and for AFP for putting this on. And for clarity, for those of you that aren't aware of my organization, the Manufacturer and Business Association, our mission is we want to see our business members thrive within the free market system, hard stop. And everything we can do to make that happen, that's what we're for. If it's against that, that's the antithesis of our existence. So with that, we speak to members like Hartman, all kinds of manufacturers such as these all the time. And some of the things that come up often, you heard it, workforce, that's the big one a lot of people run into. And the newer one, which we're all seeing right now, is inflation, right? Regardless of what we're saying is, oh, the economy's great right now. Okay, tell that to my grocery bill. Tell that to my gas. Tell that to my planned vacation that doesn't look like what it was going to be now, right? Like real people, right? Us in this room who have to actually work for a living and make that doesn't exist to us. So you can say what you want on the TV, but the reality is that's not true. So it's incumbent on people like those in this room that are willing to take time out of their busy days to push back against that narrative and say that's simply not true. Here's the facts. Here's the reality. The reality is it sucks than it did 4 years ago. And I might make even a percentage more than I did 4 years ago. It's simply not going to cut it anymore because of the rising rates of inflation. And then on our personal lives, that's no different than what we're seeing at the business level. I'm going to hopefully not get too ranty here, but I wholeheartedly push back against this terrible narrative. And I know I'm probably getting ahead of myself on the greedflation comment, but that is lazy political talking points. And I'm going to stop right there and say there's more to it. And the other thing I want to bring out on inflating businesses, and Andrew, maybe you've seen this too, it's not as sexy, it's not as attractive, but what's not being talked about because of the bear that is inflation right now is the uncontrollable rising cost of health insurance for employers. No one wants to talk about that. But the reality is especially small businesses who have to compete with their larger business competitors and do not have the ability to be as competitive on their benefits packages for something that's not a political issue, right? This is an apolitical thing, is health insurance. All the while, Pennsylvania consistently ranks in the bottom 10 in the country for being business attractive. I know the governor lately has pulled up some new numbers that are very creative, I'll say, on why it's competitive. So I'm going to stop right there. But my three biggest things I would say would be workforce, inflation, and then rising cost of health insurance.
Okay, I would like to piggyback on that. I was saving that for later, but you opened the can
Go
of
for it, Andrew.
insurance.
Fire away.
Not just health insurance. It's all insurance.
Correct.
So go look at your auto renewal. Look at your homeowner renewal. And the business equivalents, the property and casualty, they're out of control. And I was talking with somebody that was in that space recently. It's a combination of claims going up, but that's not a symptom of people doing things differently. It's a symptom of a societal shift where suddenly we're making claims on everything. And now this is talking non-business, but it has its impact. Where do you think these carriers make up their homeowner losses?
Right.
They take it out on the business owners.
Right.
So what you're seeing is a shift. And homeowner insurance isn't designed to be an investment against, small problems, but it's being used that way. Automotively, same thing. And so it's not just health; it's all the other parts of insurance as well.
Yeah.
Great points. And feel free to rant away, guys. Don't hold back.
It would not be fair to everyone's time or everyone here if all I did was rant. However, my wife would appreciate because I get it all out now. That's right. I get 10 minutes when I get home. She's like, I don't care.
Yeah, I didn't actually mean that.
Okay, cool. Thanks for clarifying.
So you guys touched on several things that we have here that we want to talk about: workforce, supply chain, infrastructure. So I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit, and I want to talk about supply chain because I think supply chain is a huge, huge issue. Maybe the biggest obstacle I see feet on the ground here. So, in your business in particular, how are you impacted by supply chain issues? What are the barriers in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I mean, if our economy was just state-driven, that would be completely applicable to, say, Pennsylvania, but it's bigger than that. What you see around you guys, this comes from all over the world. We bring product in from multiple nations. We bring it through multiple ports. And then we have a tremendous support in our domestic supply chain as well. Where we're seeing the impact of supply chain is not what it was. The narrative of COVID was very container-driven, what was coming from overseas.
Sure.
Where we're seeing supply chain now is that you had these over-ordering situations domestically. And so you had inventories go dramatically high. You had costs of those inventories go dramatically high. And now it's accessing that and getting it into the hands of the people that need it. And it then becomes a question of replacement. So I'm trying not to get too in my head, like too economic, but if you can't replace what's being sold, you still have a supply chain issue. I don't care what leads to that. The container ship situation, yeah, it's a lot better. Some of our domestic transportation problems, they're getting better. But there is still a flow through. So manufacturers made a bunch of stuff. Then distributors bought that stuff. And then distributors sold it to their customers. Well, those customers are still working through that product, which is putting pressure back on the distributor, which is putting pressure back on the manufacturer. And so it's this rebound effect. It's not the same that it was that we saw in the news 2 years ago, but it's still supply chain.
Interesting. Very, very interesting take. So, Jason, what are some of the things that we can do in Harrisburg? You know, not just you as a legislator, but us. How can we help you help small business in Pennsylvania?
So, well, when the Francis Scott Key Bridge went down and collapsed, the first thing that we tried to do was like the day after, we said, all right, now we have all these ships that can't go into the port in Baltimore. Why don't we bring them into Philly? And I didn't know this at the time. I found out quickly after because we were trying to activate all the state and federal people that come together. The port in Philly isn't deep enough. They'd have to come in and dredge. So all those ships had to be sent somewhere else. And look, think of the economic impact that we would have gotten from that. That we did not, and the future business that we might have gotten from that because we just weren't ready. And it blows my mind to this day that Philly, one of probably the biggest ports in the country, was not prepared for anything like that. Because we could have got the workforce up. We could have very easily bust them up from Baltimore.
Absolutely.
But they just weren't ready. Now, I suspect that there are plans in place to start actually doing that work now. I mean, hopefully a bridge never collapses like that again moving forward.
Sure.
But if we're ever going to increase our port's value and our utilization as a state, then it's got to start in Philly. I mean, it's right there. It's a perfect spot for it. But I'll go back to COVID. I mean, during COVID, all the shortages. Everyone here probably experienced all that. You know, part of the problem is a lot of the stuff that we get is made overseas or made in China. China's not our friend. I mean, by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
You know, we've got a lovely stretch of new highway here from South Point all the way to the airport that is just ripe for investment. And I spent, Gwen here, so my chief of staff here, we spent a lot of time trying to attract some of these companies that are American-based but have manufacturing operations in China to bring them back here. Insulation for homes. Owings Corning's trying to get them over here. Fiber cable for internet. There's only like one or two places in the world where this is made, but we couldn't get it here. Phone lines, all those sorts of things that we could not get that were all being overseas. And it only takes one thing, like one action from the Chinese government to say, guess what, we're done. You're not getting any more. And we saw it with some of the medicine and the pharmaceutical industry. We could not get the things that we needed. So why not bring them back here? We've got plenty of space for them. We've got plenty of people looking for jobs, hopefully looking for jobs. And just get back to a made in America type thing. I think that would help ease the supply chain, at least locally here too. And it would give us some sort of resiliency as a nation, not just as a state, but as a nation as well.
No, I can't agree more with that. And Jezree, what can we do? What are the steps that we should be taking to make Pennsylvania more user-friendly for business?
Oh my gosh, that's a whole panel in itself. Slash half the government? I don't know. There's so many regulations that don't need to exist.
Pick the top three.
That currently exists. There is some. It's interesting. The new governor. There's a recognition that that Pennsylvania is not business friendly. Cool. We agree on something. Great. We recently had up at our offices Secretary Ben Kirshner. He's a newly created position. I'm not of the means of more government to help solve existing government problems as the solution. But his take is trying to make Pennsylvania more business friendly. I agree with that goal. I think our approaches are pretty differently. I don't think you can spend more always to get more.
Right.
How do we make Pennsylvania more business friendly? The reality is one of the things, the big ones, is permitting on the regulatory front right now. And there is a lot of actionable steps being taken right now that isn't communicated as much. So I have to do almost a half-hat tip, if I will. Just because, I'll give you an example. There was a story of, I'm going to get the department wrong, but they went from 8 weeks on some of these permits to somewhere around like 4 or 5 days. with almost nothing new being done other than a fire and a spotlight being shined on them.
Yeah.
So, yay, that's great, an increase in that. But at the same time, what the heck?
Yeah,
that could have happened the whole time.
Why wasn't
And
that
so it
happening
just
all?
shows, you have these lifelong bureaucratic civil servants, well-intentioned perhaps, but doesn't understand business and not accountable to business of the population because they're not elected officials like Jason is, right? So they're not actually like doing the work that he's doing. Why would they? They get paid, they go home, and that's the end of it, and we all suffer for it. Sure. The reality is the states around us are much more competitive. The reality is states like Ohio, just up the road, I drove through Columbus last year. They had a giant sign on the Beltway around Columbus. It said 0% capital net income tax. Come work here, right? We just did the legislature just did some awesome stuff that our organization advocated for years was to lowering the corporate net income tax. That's what I meant to say, CNI, corporate net income tax. Went from, by the way, if you didn't know this, we were the crown. Yay, Pennsylvania. The highest rate of corporate net income tax in the country. If nothing says competitive to me, like, do you want to pay the most taxes on your business? Come to PA. What? So we decided to change that. Yay, we all agreed this is a bad idea. With how it's scheduled by 0.5% a year or every 6 months or whatever it is till it caps at 4.9 at 2035, progress, no doubt, from our record, it still puts PA in the middle of the pack. While Ohio right now today is already saying, hey, 0%. We're still going to be at 4.9. So I'll try not to get too ranty. That's one way that you can make it more business friendly. Just cutting a lot of these regulations, and then just communication. What business, if you guys are any here business owners, let me say someone wants to do business with you and you say, that sounds like a great proposal. I'll get back to you in 6 to 8 months. Heck no, I ain't coming to you. I'm going elsewhere, right? So if you want to use these fun buzzwords and say move at the speed of business, then let me see it. We're seeing some of that, but at a rising cost, and there's some other proposals that the governor wants to put in his budget about adding an insane amount of number to things that the proof isn't in the pudding on. So I'm going to stop right there.
Well, a lot of that's not consistent either. Like all the DEP regional offices for they're all different. What happens in Pittsburgh is going to be different than happens in Erie and Harrisburg and Philadelphia.
Still continuity. You're right.
Yeah, and
You're right.
it's very confusing for businesses to, okay, well, you told me or I did something in Pittsburgh, and all of a sudden it's completely different up here. It's the reason why we continue in Southwestern PA in particular to lose businesses and manufacturing to Ohio. Yeah. I mean, the tax rate is definitely a part of that, but they can go get a permit in 2 weeks. I mean, I have seen instances where we're waiting over a year and sometimes longer.
On the environmental side with DEP, it's terrible.
Yeah. And to your point about them flipping a switch and showing some light on, I think they got a new program that they've been working on for the last 10 years that they finally just got it up and running.
Gotcha.
I mean, it's sad and disappointing, but that seems to be the state of where we've been. And they always complain, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough people. Well, when you look at us comparatively with our DEP and permitting staff to other states, we actually have more and pay more than other states do, yet we do a way worse job.
True. No, that's very true. So one of the things I think where we do have control at the state level is with infrastructure. Okay, transportation, communication, all forms of infrastructure, because there's a negative impact there. And it should not be, when you think about Pennsylvania and the transportation resources we have available. Talked about the port in Philadelphia, our interstate highway system, rivers that we have. Why are we bound up like this? Why is it such a struggle when we have such an abundance of resources?
Well, before we spend a single dollar on roads and bridges in Pennsylvania, we spend over $1.3 billion on administrative costs just to have PennDOT.
Say that again.
It was $1.3 billion over a year ago. I'm sure it's higher now. That's just for administrative costs.
And PennDOT, and if anybody here works for PennDOT, I apologize for what I'm about to say, but PennDOT consistently for decades has ranked in the bottom 5 of state departments of transportation nationally.
Yeah, and I'm starting to see a little bit of a glimmer of hope of using technology to adapt to, maybe we can get into the 1990s here soon, let alone 2024.
It's a bold, that's a lofty goal.
Look, when you look at all the bridges that are out there, and we've been consistently rated one of the worst states in the country.
Yes.
We don't utilize any technology to get any kind of objective measure. Everything we do is subjective. And I'm not trying to knock bridge inspectors out there who do the visual inspections, but there's technology at our fingertips at a fraction of the cost that can tell you objectively how much life this bridge has, what problems are in there, what we can do to maintain it and stretch the life of a bridge. We just went through the whole tolling fiasco a few years ago. I'm sure many of you in this room remember that. That was PennDOT's attempt to raise more money. Now, PennDOT spends about $7 to $8 billion a year to maintain its road and bridges. And yes, we do get all 4 seasons in Pennsylvania, and it's different than other states. But other states around us seem to do a much better job than we do at managing everything. So, yes, we've done a horrible job. We spend way too much money on the administrative part of it. I've had legislation in the past to try to consolidate some of that. We have 11 regional districts across the state, and they all have their own administrative buildings. And there's no reason why we can't consolidate some of that. That would save a lot of money. But we are very tribal in Pennsylvania, and we like everything as local as possible. And I get that, but it comes at a huge cost. I mean, I don't think there's a single part of this area that hasn't seen an orange cone at least every month.
What's the joke? That's the state flower of Pennsylvania.
It really is. It's blooming. It's blooming now.
Yeah. And that's a very good point. But what do you think on that? Because that directly is impacting you, and I can see no reason for it.
You know, something you were saying, Jason, I think is actually sort of a little bit deeper, and it might be something that's more to like the psyche of the region. Embracing new technology. You know, we're seeing that in business. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of speakers that are now coming out with AI and the applications of things like AI. And, you know, I'm only in my early 40s, and there's things about AI that are scary. It's new technology even for me. And yet that willingness to embrace new, to vet it, to look for tested product in order to bring efficiency to your business. And if we would see that same level of desire to acquire that and utilize it at the government level, the opportunities I think are amazing. I think it's the big pivot point. Businesses that get behind it, that find out how to use it, are gonna be ahead.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing for business. Like if you can take that kind of cost out of your structure, you can really improve some things. I didn't even know about it from the bridge standpoint, but that makes total sense. You know, it's interesting in our world, the infrastructure impact isn't horrible. It is why we're here. You know, as a business, we were in downtown Pittsburgh from 1952 to 1991.
Okay.
And the reason for that was it was the center of commerce. But it got to the point where you couldn't bring goods in and out of your facility easily, efficiently, inexpensively. I will say this, Washington County, where we are right now, this is a wonderful place for this business. But the improvement that's possible, you know, I know we're trying to look ahead. We're trying to say, how do we get better? There's so many better ways. I loved what you were talking about too, Jason, with that corridor up to the airport. I drive that more than I've ever driven it, which is really cool. I get to travel some nice places, but there's just nothing happening there. And that's just, it's an amazing stretch of road. That should be developed.
Well, there was a multi-billion-dollar development shortly. It was announced shortly before COVID, and right now they're moving through phase 1. They had several larger companies withdraw. I mean, I think it was over 500,000 square feet of manufacturing and industrial space that they've had to kind of back off for now. But they are moving phase 1 off of the McDonald exit. I think or is it Midway? It's in Midway. It's technically the borough of Midway and Robinson Township over there. But that's going up now. But honestly, that whole area should be developed. That whole stretch there. I mean, it is a ripe piece of real estate when you consider all the amenities and everything we have in this area, especially for other parts of the country to come here. It makes perfect sense.
Well, and we're building $1 billion airport right at the end of it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard to sit and say we need to with what you just said, that we have $1 billion in administrative costs and $7 billion in maintenance costs. It's hard to justify or get your head around that we need more investment in infrastructure, but we actually do. But it needs to be the right investment, right?
Well, it needs to be, our maintenance of our roads and bridges and our infrastructure needs to be better planned. The strategic planning behind that has been virtually non-existent. I mean, last year, and you talk about technology a little bit. So last year, the budget didn't get finalized, I think, until December, shortly before Christmas. There were aspects of the budget that went into effect but didn't. But the PennDOT employees, when I was meeting with them, said they could not travel to conferences. They were not allowed to until the budget was done. And some of the conferences they wanted to go to were about utilization of technology across the country, where they were going to receive presentations on what they could use, what's been proven to work, and what doesn't. And they're like, we want to do this, but we can't go because our secretary or the governor or whoever, whatever the policy is, will not allow us to go. And I'm like, that's not a good excuse. Like, zoom in, do whatever you need to do, but get the information, because this has potential to save us billions of dollars and really map out our priorities, because that's the problem. We could go, like, I gave them a plan. I sat down with a couple engineers from other states and other departments, and I gave them a plan to take us from one of the worst states in the country when it comes to rated bridges and fixing that and extending their lives to one of the top 10. And they basically laughed at me and said, there's no way we could do that. I said, it's simple. $20 million pilot program right now on technology utilization and PennDOT, and you could do it. And with the infrastructure bill, because the money is still there from the feds, they could take matching dollars from that. And they could fix all the local bridges, too, that are not state-owned, because there's no match from the federal government required. What PennDOT decided to do was do all the state bridges with that money, and it's going to cost us over, I think, $1.5 billion just in matching funds to do the work they want to do. There was a 0% match on local bridges. We could have went from last to first, and they decided not to. Government at its finest.
To boil it down, it sounds like it's almost like a willpower piece. The
Yeah.
dollars are there. The cultural willingness is there. We need political willingness to change the way we think about it and the way we deploy it.
Fascinating stuff. When you think about what goes on, the intricacies that you guys deal with in Harrisburg, both of you from your own perspectives. But I want to talk about regulatory issues for a moment. That's been brought up a couple of times. And we have what I think is a great question from the audience. And I'm going to put this out there for all three of you. Looking at the existing regulatory environment, what is the number one state and the number one federal regulation that would help you the most if it disappeared today?
I feel like a business owner would be a good person to say, what's the one thing that if you could go away for operational purpose?
I mean, if you want, I'll start. I think it's one of the things that my colleagues have actually proposed. Representative Tim O'Neill and Josh Kale was deemed approved permitting.
Yeah.
If you can't get your permit approved in the timeline that's in regulation right now, then it's deemed approved.
That's huge.
Look, it's not your problem that DEP and the other permitting agencies can't do their job. It's their problem. So why should that hinder you? If you have all of your paperwork done appropriately, signed off by your engineer with their stamp or architect or whoever's put their stamp on, to me, that's good. If DEP can't get to it, that's a them problem, not a you problem. You should get your permit. You should start working. You should go right now. I mean, it's a little late for that now, but I mean, maybe never too late.
Is it ever too late? I don't know.
So deemed approved, that's a great answer. I don't know if that's the number one, but it's definitely a one. And I almost said it earlier. And so I asked Secretary Kirshner literally Tuesday, 6 days ago, that exact question, because that's the thing I get is I think it's Ohio and a few others have this deemed approved. And he gave a lot of reasons why it shouldn't happen. And well, that won't actually need to be there because all the improvements they're making. And okay, cool. But the reality is, and maybe they are, and I answer my own question, but do we really think that the bureaucrats of Ohio are better than Pennsylvanians? I hope not. But maybe that's like what he's self-admitting, right?
Possibly.
Good Lord.
Yeah, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You got anything?
I think from a regulatory standpoint, it's interesting. That deemed approved makes sense for new investment growth.
Yes.
But so much of Pennsylvania's business is business in place. Mm-hmm. It's businesses like this that have been here for decades. Correct. So from a regulatory, we don't run into a lot of regulatory impact. But one thing that would be beneficial would be some creative tax structures to help us train, improve, hire, things like that. So we don't deal with a lot of regulation outside of that. So that would be very beneficial.
And
how are you hearing that the regulatory issues that we're discussing are impacting local jobs? What are you hearing from your constituents?
The tax structure is probably one of the biggest ones, and this is the one that I harp on all the time, is tax credits. I'm not a huge advocate of tax credits because basically it's corporate welfare. And to your point, it goes after driving new businesses. Like when Amazon, everybody wanted Amazon to come here, put their headquarters in Pennsylvania. But think about how much it would have cost to an established business owner who gets nothing out of that. Right. The argument has always been make it a level playing field for everybody to benefit, not just one or two hand-picked companies. So, I go back on that all the time. We talk about, really reducing the corporate net income tax rate, yeah, we did 1%. Yay us. Yeah, we're not the worst anymore, but we're like 48th out of 50. And we're on track. But every year we do a budget, is it possible? It's possible that we could stop doing that for budgetary reasons. So we're trying to expedite it in this budget to move it a couple or 3%. To do one big jump, because 1%, look, I'm not discounting 1% of the government taking your money is not a big deal, but if we could do 3 or 4% at one time, now that helps a lot more. So why not do it? Especially when you have a governor out there who is saying we have 12 or 13 billion dollars that's available in our rainy day fund that we've never had before. Let's use it wisely. Well, you could take the other side of that coin and say, well, why don't we just start reducing taxes? The government is we're at a point financially where we can afford to do this. I've been in office now almost for 10 years. My first 6 years, we barely were able to scrape money together to put together a budget. We had to get very creative in finding revenue, and we couldn't reduce taxes then because we didn't have the ability to. Now we have the access funds to do it. So if we don't do it now, then when are we going to do it? It's the perfect opportunity to do it. Let's not spend every penny we have. Why don't we give it back to everybody and make a business environment that is much more friendly, especially for our existing businesses who have stood here with us through a lot of time when they could have very easily picked up and gone to Ohio or West Virginia or wherever. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Well, I want to applaud Representative Ortitay here for having that kind of mindset and kind of underline this whole, to coin President Obama, elections have consequences, right? The people you vote for have different mentalities. And there's a difference, by the way. Those of you that are business owners, entrepreneurs, right? I don't know if you, there's a difference between an asset mentality and a liability mentality. And the way that certain people in the government right now are talking about this budget and this service, hey, we have a couple dollars. So there's two different kind of people in this world. I have a couple extra dollars, and this is, if you're going to be the person, forgive me if you disagree with me, but economically, it's just the way it shakes out. You're that employee, and someone says, here, you got your bonus this year. It's $1,000 over. You know what we're going to do? We're going to buy a new boat. That's a liability. Right. Or if that person gets that $1,000 and say, how can I make this $1,000, $10,000? Assets, right? Asset liability, or asset or liability. So my point is, with this budget, hey, there's a surplus. Right now, the governor's narrative is liability. Let's spend until it's all the freaking gone, right? Now what? What if something happens again? What if something crazy? Did we just experience some global event a couple years ago that shut us all down? What if something happened again? A few years ago, it wasn't that far-fetched. So that's very short-sighted. I would say when your question, Jamie, too, on, we're talking about the tax incentives for places like Hartman. The reality is it would be great to get Intel, like we missed out on the opportunity in Columbus just a few years ago, where there's a giant thing. Reality is Pennsylvania isn't structured in a way where we weren't even, I've had those conversations with the president of the PA Chamber, and he had those, asked him, Pennsylvania wasn't even on the table for discussion. Just a couple hours earlier, they said, we don't want to go there for a variety of reasons. Things like right to work, the PRO Act that we're about to hit on, but that they're trying to push in with President Biden trying to push down. When those types of things are put in, that is a huge X to say, do not invest, do not come here. The reality is, instead of getting a couple really large companies to move here, it would be great. That's like the pie in the sky. We have a lot of really good existing companies here. And what we should be doing is to be incentivized ways for them to grow, because it's much easier to get 300 companies to grow 3 jobs than to get one company to bring in 3,000 jobs. Right. That's the reality.
Oh, it's 100%. Show of hands, who's familiar with the PRO Act? Everybody familiar with that? Do you want to give just a little bit of background on that, and then we can...
I'm not an expert, but so the short cliff notes at the federal level, right? So this isn't a state issue for Representative Ortitay so much. Not that he doesn't support it, I'm sure, but federally, they've been pushing this some time to it's going to kill worker choice. It's just going to make us not... it's going to kill small businesses, really, is what's really going to hurt. And all these kind of things that it's aimed at, like this boogeyman thing, which I hate. Like, people always get at me like, oh, Jezree, like, you represent big business, blah, blah, blah. No, I represent our economy. The businesses like Hartman, right? These are the kind of companies who actually sponsor your kids' Little League teams, right? They're invested in your communities. Right. They know your employees by name, and you may have even went to high school with some of them. It's not the Walmarts of the world or the Amazons of the world. These are the real people who actually make up our economy. So if things like the PRO Act move along and President Biden administration gets its way, that's who it's going to affect negatively. And more importantly, the people who work for them.
Absolutely.
A little bit more on the PRO Act.
Go ahead.
So the PRO Act was born out of a California state resolution that passed a number of years ago called AB 5, which basically drove the independent contractor business out of the state of California. It was originally targeting Uber and Lyft, who, by the way, ran a $200 million campaign to get themselves exempted from the legislation. So it was designed to create, in the name of the worker, which is a good worker safety, worker fairness. There's well-intended thought behind it. But what it ended up doing, it ended up driving independent truckers and independent contractors out of the state of California. People had to make real choices to close up shop in a state that they loved, where their kids were born, where their parents lived, where they went to church, where they had to make a choice of either go work for somebody, eliminate the independent contractor status and go work for somebody,
Become an employee
or leave.
or leave.
And overnight, 70,000 people left the state of California that were just in the trucking industry, just trucking. That doesn't include personal trainers,
Right.
artists, a myriad of applications. Well, the PRO Act is California's AB 5 on steroids at the federal level.
Correct.
And again, well-intentioned, because there are bad actors, just like in any sector of the economy. There are bad actors who take advantage of independent contractors.
Yep.
They use them to skirt tax law. They use them to do other things like that. We can structure something to go after them without doing a broad brush policy which eliminates the worker's choice. In the name of protecting the worker, you're eliminating worker choice.
Right.
Obviously, that's a very biased interpretation from where I sit politically and socially, but that's it in a nutshell. You know, it eliminates a business like mine to go out and hire an independent contractor in marketing, because I don't want a full-time marketing person. So I'm going to go find somebody that's really good at photography or social or event planning, and I'm going to bring him in as an independent contractor. Under the
Right.
PRO Act, that would be illegal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that sound about
Yeah.
consistent with your interpretation?
100%.
So how do we keep that from happening in Pennsylvania? How can Harrisburg prevent that from, what can we do?
Well, California seems to be the testing ground for all these crazy policies to begin with. Thankfully, we haven't seen anything yet. At least I haven't seen anything come across my desk. I do remember when it was going on in California, Uber was here because they asked me to introduce a bill to make sure that they would be protected in the event something like that would pass. We never actually moved anything, but it was on the table. So, but I haven't seen anything yet. Hopefully that's not something being proposed here. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, but I don't think it would have legs, at least not yet.
Well, and a comment on that too. Federally, it's in committee somewhere.
Yeah, it's
But
kind
right
of
now,
languishing someplace.
Those that are in the know, which I'm only puppeting or parroting what I've heard, it doesn't have legs there either. But it's still a threat.
It exists. And until people, that's why events like this, guys, and people who are engaged like this are vocal to push back at it. Because if there's no one speaking out against these things, it's going to be deemed as acceptable. And it'll slowly keep moving the meter. So even though you say, like, oh, I'm involved locally or whatever,
Sure.
and you feel like you're not making an effort, believe me, you are, because it really helps those people like Representative Ortitay who are actually working for the government, in the government on our behalf, to fight against these things. So be active and speak out against these things.
Yeah,
with love.
And one thing to remember. So next month is budget month in Pennsylvania. And all sorts of crazy stuff always bubbles up, and usually bubbles up at the last minute. And stuff like this could always rear its head. So it's important to be vigilant about these things, because when you start talking budget negotiations, you'd be surprised the crazy antics and ideas and legislation that never saw a hearing, never saw a bill move, just randomly pop up, because all the lobbyists come running right up. They're in the governor, they're with the Senate, they're with the House. They're all talking to leaders, and they're all trying to button everything up and because look, the lobbyists are paid, they have clients to get their priorities in there. So sometimes things they sneak in there. You got to be careful.
Sure. And when you're talking about a budget, you're talking about a document like this thick, right?
You're talking thousands of pages.
It's easy to slide something in there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start to wrap this up. Do we have any questions from the? Okay. So one last thing on inflation, and it's a little bit of a long question, so bear with me. So 2 years ago, we reached a 40-year peak in inflation nationally. Okay. We all know about that, but the situation hasn't really improved. So the cost of living surged by 19.4% for families. Average household needs an extra $11,400 estimated, per year, just to maintain, to stay even. So gasoline's going up 33%, airfare 33%, groceries 21%, natural gas 27%, electricity 29%, rent 21%. But yet, here in Pennsylvania, Senator Casey and Governor Shapiro are blaming corporate greed for this increase in costs. So if you want to respond, you can respond. But what are your thoughts on that? Because you guys represent three different perspectives on this. And this is nothing, we're not attacking the governor or Senator Casey, but those comments are real, they're out there. So how do you respond to that?
That's a redirection. That's a redirection by elected officials, because I just heard a statistic this last week at a conference. Our federal government used to run at something like a $900 billion deficit, or that was considered like an okay. Again, these are big numbers, so don't quote me on them. This is me trying to pop it off the top of my head. You go back 5 years ago, that was a federal yearly deficit that would be considered like, I don't really like it, but like, okay, it's okay.
We can live with it.
We are printing that every quarter. We are doing that every quarter with currency printing in our government. And it's not being talked about anywhere. Every quarter. What was 5 years ago was considered a yearly acceptable number. We're doing it every quarter. That starts one place and one place only.
That's scary.
It's federal willpower.
Right.
So by the way, that means our debt is going up at like a $3.6 trillion rate.
Yeah, we're at $34 trillion.
Every single year. Every quarter, we're going into debt almost $900 billion. So that's a redirection. It's back to my earlier comment. It's willpower. If we want to change inflation, and I do think some macroeconomic trends, we are in a trend of inflation. We've come out of a long trend of really nice inflation levels. And it's only reasonable to see it start to creep upward. We don't like it, but it is reasonable to expect that, economically speaking. If we want to change it, it's way deeper. It starts with political willpower. We've got to stop spending.
So even though we have the ability, we just can't print more money. What you're saying?
Well, yeah, correct.
Okay. Just checking. Let's just making sure. So we have some great questions from the audience. Thank you so much, everybody.
No, let's get to some of those questions.
Did you want to add something?
No. You said we won't speak bad about the elected officials for saying that, but I will. That's terrible. It's lazy, cheap political talking points. And if anyone took an Econ 101 when they were a freshman in college, so I mean, I'm sorry if many people are confused by this and think that's how inflation works, but there's some really easy cartoon videos on YouTube that will help you understand how economics and inflation actually work, and that's not one of them. Shame on anyone that might be fooled by cheap political talking points, by the way, coming up in an election year. It's lazy. And by the way, at the expense of those people who are actually creating jobs in our economy, like Hartman and those others. And every business owner, red-blooded American in Pennsylvania, who owns a business should be offended by that.
Absolutely.
Because they're picking on them unnecessarily as the boogeyman for cheap political talking points to use in a fundraising email. The reality is business owners don't have the luxury of politics, right? They got businesses to run. They have more important things. They have people's families to care about. And this is terrible, and shame on them for saying that. But I want to hear the questions.
And thank you for saying that. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. That needed to be said, and I appreciate it. Okay, first question from the audience is for you, Jason. What does making a community a place for business to come and set up look like?
I think we touched upon this. I think one of the important things is, one, having infrastructure. If you've got no electricity, no water, no sewage, or anything like that, you can put a building up in the middle of the field, you're probably going to be in some trouble. Now, one of the benefits that we have in this area is that we have natural gas, and a lot of companies, especially manufacturers, come in, they can drill their own well. It's what the airport does. I think they'll be completely self-sustaining once this new portion is done, if they aren't already. So that's helpful. But if you don't have the infrastructure in place, I mean, it's just like setting up shop in the middle of North Dakota. I mean, it's tough. But I think infrastructure is probably the most important aspect of that. And then having a community around that. Coming in, I mean, you look at this area here. Yeah, it's a lot of suburban areas, but there's a lot of rural areas here too. A lot of farmland. Like growing up, a lot of this place that's suburban now was farmland when I was a kid, and that wasn't that long ago. But I think just being embedded in a community where people, know they can go to work. I look at it like my grandfather and even my parents to a degree. They worked at a company for 20 or 30 years. They didn't job hop like my generation does every 5 or 10 years. It's a staple of the community, and that's something that we like to see. So infrastructure, being part of the community, I think those are two big things.
And I think there's kind of a chicken and egg there, right? Though, because, to go out and try to attract businesses, you have to have the infrastructure, but to get the money to fund the infrastructure from a community standpoint at ground level, you have to have commitments from businesses to come. So that kind of, there's a balancing act there where the private sector, public, everybody has to work together to make that work, or else it just won't work, because which one comes first? Yeah. Okay, this one is for everybody. What is preventing meaningful policy change to effectively address healthcare costs for small businesses? What's the barrier? What's preventing it?
I'll say this in general, just about the entire healthcare system. It's sick care. It's not healthcare. It's sick care. You go to the doctor when you're sick. You go to the hospital when you need to have a surgery. It's not about preventative care. Now, we've taken some steps to move in that direction, but I mean, I'm not going to get in here and lecture people about what they eat and the stuff that's in our food and how often you go get checkups and get blood work done. But honestly, at the end of the day, if you're not doing preventative care, you're doing sick care. And that cost will continue to rise until the healthcare system finally realizes that and that people have had enough of it. I mean, look around and look at your paychecks. Look at your insurance costs. They've done nothing but go up, it's, at least since I've been an adult, every single year. I thought Obamacare was supposed to fix that. It didn't. All it did was just take the system that it currently had and put it on steroids and made it worse. It made the problem worse. So, I mean, until people start realizing that preventative care is where it should be and not sick care, these rates are going to continue to go up no matter what you do.
Jamie, was the question what can be done or what's preventing it?
What is preventing meaningful policy changes?
So specific on the policy, it is politics. And I'll give you hard examples of this, right? So our organization has been at the forefront at leading the charge in the state of Pennsylvania on creating more effective, affordable health insurance specifically for small businesses, right? Because we used to have a plan in place that did this very thing. Let me take a step further. We had legislation 2 sessions ago introduced in the legislature to address this very thing and allow it to happen like it did. And I'll say nothing has been more misappropriately titled than the Affordable Care Act because it's been anything but. And it specifically negatively affected small businesses. I'll even tell you, our previous bill was a bipartisan bill. Get this. In the Senate, our Senate version of the bill had several R's, and we had the highest ranking Democrats on it. Jay Costa, right up here in Pittsburgh, highest ranking Senate minority leader, so highest ranking Democrat in the Senate. And then we had Sharaf Street, who is the Senate minority leader of the Insurance Committee, both of them Democrats. Sharaf Street, literally the chairman now of the Pennsylvania Democrat Party, right? And then we had Republicans on their side. We had the highest ranking R's and the highest ranking D's, both agreeing this is a problem. We shouldn't make this political. And what happened? It immediately became political when Governor Wolf's administration got involved. And we went from having a bill, and this is so terribly ironic, right? It was scheduled for a vote March of 2020, like March 16th. Anyone remember what happened March 2020? That is the worst timing ever for COVID. Not that it was good timing at any point for COVID, But so obviously the bill got pushed to the back burner. It wasn't a priority because obviously there was a lot of priorities that came up. But then when it came back around, all of a sudden, I'm just going to be real with y'all because I'm not an elected official and I don't have the luxury of people got paid from PACs that had money and all of a sudden their tune changed. So what's the barrier from actual meaningful change? Lack of education, understanding on what actually happens in the almighty dollar in politics is terrible. So that's what happened. Because the reality is, before a recent federal thing just came down from the Biden administration that just codified getting rid of these from being able to possibility, 33 or 30, I'm going to say 33, because it might have been 36, but for sure 33. 33 other states allowed these association health plan arrangements to happen. And by the way, those weren't all red states. A lot of these, some of them are blue, most of them are purple, right? This is not a political thing. It was a small business thing. Politics is what gets in the way from meaningful things from happening.
Interesting.
I digress.
Great take. No, that's okay. Yep.
Well said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Once again, thank you.